Sorry, Rudolph, you're not getting in this orchard. So we've been building, in my opinion, what is one of the most deer-proof fences you can build. Now, there's going to be quite a few different things that we're going to be implementing here to make it the most deer-proof fence, because it has to be the most deer-proof fence. You see, not only are we going to have our seed farm, we're also going to have our orchard and a bunch of other things, even like a raised bed garden, an in-ground garden. Everything that you've ever seen on the MIgardener channel is all going to be consolidated here. And so we cannot afford to have deer coming in and completely pillaging our gardens for everything that they're worth. And so we definitely need to make sure that this is deer proof. So it's going to be a little bit more extreme than you would probably implement. However, you can definitely take some of these tips and you can implement them, or you can break them apart and kind of build your fence a la carte, if you will. So like just take out one little bit that you like about it and try that. There are always going to be people that have something to say about a deer proof fence, because in my opinion, making a deer proof fence is a bit of an oxymoron. There is always a chance that a deer will get through in all circumstances. So you really can't plan for everything. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that you're going to try to plan for as many scenarios as possible and basically reduce your chances as you go. So if you were to look at the pie, like if you look at the chances of a deer coming into your garden as like a pie or a pizza or whatever, right? No fence at all, nothing, means there's a 100% chance that if there's a deer in the area, it will be able to get into your garden. At that point, you can start stacking on different deterrents, and that will greatly reduce the probability of a deer coming in. And what I've really kind of isolated down through my research is there are 3 main criteria that you can stack on to increase your odds. And those 3 stackable things are what we're going to talk about. And they're going to be things we're going to implement in our deer-proof fence here, so that we basically cover about 75 to 80% of the likelihood that a deer is going to come into the garden. And so this is going to take us from 100% chance down to only about a 20% chance, or even lower in some cases. So let's get going. So the first component that's going to keep deer out is height. Now, a lot of people debate about how high a deer can jump. This fence right here, these were originally 8-foot tall posts. But as you can see, they are no longer 8 feet tall. They're only about 5 to 5.5 feet. That's because we had to take these 8-foot posts and bury them about 3 to 3.5 feet in the ground. For where we're at in the world, we have what's called a frost line. And you need to get below that frost line so that the frost doesn't heave your posts. A frost can heave a post up to 2 feet in a single season, based on just the expansion and contraction in the soil. It expands, it pushes up, and it'll push your posts right out of the ground and lay them flat on the ground. It is the worst feeling in the world. I've seen it. I've seen a lot of people's barns and even homes that don't have their footings down below the frost line. Huge bad things can happen. So we got our posts about 3 to 3.5 feet in the ground, giving us only about 5 to 5.5 feet. Now, as you know, as a fence here, it's a nice sturdy fence, looks really nice. However, this would only probably stop maybe 10% of the deer. Like you go from 100% likelihood of getting a deer with no fence to maybe about a 90% likelihood with about a 5-foot fence. And the reason why is because most deer, most fully mature deer, you know, we have a metal wire every foot. And so most small deer are not going to be able to really jump over this, the fawns. But as soon as you have a 2 or 3 year old deer, there's no problem with them clearing this fence. In fact, they could clear even higher. So what are we going to do? We're going to implement height. Height is one of the largest deterrents that keeps deer out. Now, obviously, it's difficult because you can't just make a fence to the sky. You could, but it's going to be very expensive and materials are very challenging. So what we're implementing here is basically a hybrid fence. We have an 8-foot post down in the ground. So we're about 5.5 feet here. And then we have this is considered a light duty, but they're pretty heavy once you get up to the size. This is a 6-foot tall T-post. It's a U-channel. They have a T-post, which is like a T. It's a really rigid, that's what the outer fence is made of. We'll get to that in a second. And then they have what's called a U-channel. The U-channel is a very inexpensive option, but they are great for what we're doing here, because what we're going to do is we're going to brace this up against this post, It'll set very flat like this. And then we're going to have 1, 2, and 3 screws that we're going to fix this post to. And basically this is going to then brace against the post here. And we're going to be getting an extra, quite literally, an extra 4.5 feet above this, giving us about a 9.5 foot tall fence. And so that it gives us plenty of height. Some will say that a deer can clear about 10 feet from basically like a running start. They'll clear about 10 feet. Many scientists say that a deer can only clear about 8 feet from like basically standing, just standing still. A deer can jump over 8 feet. So this is going to make sure that deer are not able to be standing. And then that's going to basically reduce the chances about 40 to 50% likelihood. So once we have an 8.5 foot tall fence, we're going to basically take from 100% likelihood of a deer coming in down to only about a 50% likelihood with a 9 to 9.5 foot fence. All right, so what we're doing here is we're just attaching the screw to the T-post and into the post here. Now, the great thing with these screws is that they are, I'll show you what I got here. This is a SDWH timber hex screw made by Simpson Strong Tie. They are super, super nice. But what I love about them is they're a hex so that you can really apply them pretty easily to the fence post. They got a lot of traction. Nothing really slips and strips, but it also has a built-in little washer. The little washer head really bites in and holds to this T-post, which I absolutely love. So, and the great thing is too, the diameter, I'm not sure if you can see the diameter or not. Hannah kind of zoom in, but the diameter of the screw is fantastic. This is exactly what we're using, simply because on these 6 foot light duty T-posts, we don't have to pre-drill any holes. Literally, it goes right into the pre-drilled hole on these T-posts, which is awesome. And so then you just go right in, fixes just perfectly, which is awesome, just like that. And now this sucker's going nowhere, which is great. So now that we got those screws in, we're going to talk about what we're going to use up here to basically run our lines. So there's a couple different options. Now you can keep running metal wire. Obviously on the lower runs, metal wire is important because that adds to kind of the strength of the fence. You know, if a deer approaches it and really bumps up against it, there's a good chance that the deer will then kind of back up from that fence and assess the height of the fence at that point, because a deer can't just go barging right through it. I mean, it could, but if the fence is strong enough, again, we talked about that in the fence building project, that the average deer is going to be deterred by anything about 14 gauge. You can go 12 gauge if you want, but that's pretty rigid and it's a little bit overkill for even a deer. So you can just keep running wires the whole way. However, that gets to be very expensive and very tiring. What I have found, and through my research, a lot of people are using these for deer-proof fencing, and this is called power tape. And the thing that I love about this 1/2-inch power tape is that it is flat, so it's very visible. You'll notice, or maybe you don't notice, maybe you can see the lines, but when you're back for about 20 feet from the fence line, you can't even see that they're there. And so we have to put ribbons along these wires here so that not only do people see them that are on snowmobiles in the winter for safety, but also the deer can notice that there's a fence there, so they don't just go busting right through and, you know, Leroy Jenkins right into the fence. So the other thing that I love about this, not only is it really visible, but it's also really lightweight and it is strong. This stuff is crazy strong. It has 1,250 pounds of braking strength. That means that this stuff is basically, it's almost as strong as this wire is here. And the only downside is how expensive this stuff is. So I traded it for, we're only gonna do 3 runs of this versus, 9 runs of it. Ideally, I mean, I would just put this over the whole fence. It's braided polypropylene, that's a mouthful, and it is incredibly, incredibly strong. This is what they make, like the straps, your ratchet straps for like towing stuff on your trailer. That's what this stuff's made out of. And it is really, really strong. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna basically fish it through the hole here. We're gonna, almost like a shoelace on the end, we're gonna fish it through, run it along the fence, And that's going to give us an incredibly visible, incredibly strong upper fence post here that is going to resist even the most determined deer. So the height eliminates roughly about 50% of the likelihood that a deer is going to jump in. The second is what's considered a psychological fence. Now, deer have very poor depth perception. That basically is the ability to perceive how far something is, right? The distance from a certain object to another object is really poor in deer. And basically what we're going to do is we already have done, but what you can do as well, is you can implement a psychological deer fence by putting two separate fences a short distance apart, which forces them to come up to the first fence, then assess how far it is to jump through the second fence. Because they don't have the ability to necessarily, if you just have the height, they could assess the height roughly and say, yeah, maybe I'll yeet myself over that fence and hopefully everything's gonna be good. However, if you have a secondary fence, what they're going to do is it's going to force them, and this is a really inexpensive option. It doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be really expensive or overbuilt. We're talking a single line here of electric wire. This is an electrically charged wire here, which adds an additional, we'll talk about that in a second. That adds an additional deterrent. The little electric poke that they get is obviously not comfortable. So they're gonna walk up to this and they're going to assess it. They usually bump stuff with their nose, kind of just assess it. They're gonna get shocked. They're not gonna love that. But let's say that they don't do that. Then they're going to have to walk up to this first fence, which is very visible, it's white. And they're going to say, all right, do I jump? And if they jump, then they're going to also see the secondary fence and they're going to say, okay, if I jump, how far is that secondary fence that I have to jump? And the problem is many deer will not jump to an area that they do not know they can land safely. And so you're going to have a large percentage of your deer, about 30%, about 20 to 30% of those deer are not going to even try to jump over a double fence. And so in most cases, that is going to eliminate roughly between the height and the secondary fence with electricity is going to eliminate, again, roughly about, again, 20 to 30% of those probabilities. So now you're already at roughly around 70 to 80% likelihood that a deer is not going to enter the property. Now, how far away is this fence? The really important thing with a psychological fence is you want to put it close enough that if they were to jump in it, they're going to be like, ugh. But you don't want it so far away that they're just going to, Mario Brothers hop over one and then over the other. You don't want them to do a double jump on you because they will get you every time. But what you want is you want that sweet spot where they can't necessarily fit comfortably within this first row. And that's a widely contested discussion that a lot of people have. Is it 3 feet? Is it 4 feet? Is it 6 feet? And so many people say err on the side of 3 feet rather than 6 feet. Because if it's a small deer, 6 feet, it can fit in there no problem. A larger deer has a little tougher time kind of turning around and being mobile. Obviously, having it electrically charged increases that, makes it very effective, because as soon as they bump it, obviously, no deer is gonna like to get poked with 7,000 volts. This is very, very, it's not on right now, but when it's on, it gives you a good shock. So that's kind of the idea behind the psychological fence. Some people will even have another fence on the other side. You totally can. However, in my opinion, the research that I've done, 2 is more than sufficient. In New Zealand, where they have really bad sheep problems, they will find, and other animals as well, they find that 2 fences is more than sufficient. And that's where I got a lot of my research for the data that I was gathering about the ultimate deer-proof fence. So for the electric fence, what we're using here is called poly wire. This is, in my opinion, a must-have from everyone that I've talked to. Poly wire will last the longest. It will shock the most. It carries the most amount of electric current. And you really, really should get yourself some poly wire if you're gonna do this. And it's easy to apply too. We ran it through the T-posts, and attached to the T-post are these little plastic standoffs that keep it from grounding out, because you don't want it to touch anything metal. Otherwise, it will basically, you'll just be shocking the earth essentially. So it's got these little plastic standoffs that you run the line through. And we're using, again, you know, it's a widely contested topic. There's a lot of different brands out there in terms of the battery banks. You can buy ones that are hardwired right into your home. Technology has become so much more advanced that these little solar banks here are awesome. This one is from American Farm Works, but Premier One is another great company. No sponsorships. We're kind of just, you know, we're learning as we go as well through talking to people. So if it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, it's just because I've talked to probably 30 or 40 different farmers and quite a few different fencing people that have given me the information that I can give to you with a pretty good level of confidence, at least. And so, yeah, so we're just using the Premier One. This is a 10-mile rated fence. It runs at about 0.15 joules. And again, we hooked up a fence tester to this, and it was shocking at roughly around 7,000 volts. So it's got a real good charge to it. Obviously, the larger the battery bank, the more power. So if you want to make sure you get one that's rated for deer, if you're using an electric fence, definitely have it rated for deer. Otherwise, it's not going to really do anything. They have one for small animals, they have one for larger animals, and you just want to, again, kind of do your research. So that's the electric fence portion. And then the third and final portion is aromatics. Deer are very sensitive to smells. Deer can actually smell a person from over 2,000 feet away. And so you have to imagine just how sensitive their nose is, because again, when they're assessing threats, right, out in the wild, their eyesight is not incredible, but their nose is their biggest attribute. And that's exactly why, you know, if you're a hunter, you always go downwind, or you always go upwind of downwind. Yeah, downwind. You want to be away, you want the scent to be blown away from the deer rather than to the deer. And so they have a really great sense of smell. And one of the best ways that you can use aromatics to your favor is with Irish Spring soap. So what we're going to be doing throughout winter is we're going to be about every 50 to 60 feet. We bought in bulk, big box of Irish Spring soap. We're going to drill a hole through it, just take a piece of string, tie it to the fence post, and that scent is essentially going to deter any deer that would even consider coming up to the fence. They're going to be deterred from that as well. And combining those three, the height, the distance away with a psychological fence, and aromatics, in my opinion, is going to be one of the best ways to keep us almost 100% deer proof. I don't know for sure. I will never know for sure until something happens. But I would say if I was a betting man, which I don't bet, but if I was a betting man, I would say that the height plus the electrified psychological fence and the Irish Spring soap, I would put us somewhere in my level of confidence. I would say 80 to 85% likelihood that we're not going to have any deer in the garden, or in the farm, I should say. So with that, I hope you guys will try some of these. I know that obviously, again, this is a widely contested topic. There are so many people that talk about deer-proof fences, what it really requires, and if it even is, again, if it's an oxymoron, if there even is such a thing as a deer-proof fence. The final thing I will say, I guess in closing all of this, is that none of this is going to stop a deer that is fleeing something out of fear. A deer that is basically in fight or flight mode will run through a brick wall. They will not care if there's an electric fence. They will not care if there's a metal fence. They will drag the whole fence along with it until they are away from the threat. And so if they are being chased by something, or if they are scared enough to keep running, they're going to go right through it. And that is obviously where we can make repairs, but they are not going to, in that case, they're not going to be stopping to consume anything. They're not going to be like, I'm running for my life. Oh, wait, apple tree. They're not like that. So at least in that case, it's good, but it's going to cause some damage. So I would say, again, 80-85% likelihood we're not going to have any deer. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new, and hopefully this helped to kind of consolidate a lot of the uncertainty and all the contradicting information out there that you hear. And because again, I've kind of taken all the information I've read, consolidated it down, and kind of made, in my opinion, what is, I feel really confident to be a deer-proof fence. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you all learned something new. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider clicking this one. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. Also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free, and we upload videos every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. We also have vegetable seeds, fertilizer, or tools. If you need any of those, consider visiting MIgardener.com. Links will be in the description box below. We've got you covered. And as always, we'll see you all in the garden. Take care.